Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Big Picture. As the year 2013 comes to an end and 2014 is upon us, India is staring at a year which is going to be significant on many fronts. What will be watched keenly is the kind of a political scenario which will emerge following the 2014 Lok Sabha elections. The results of this will also decide on the kind of economic policies which will be undertaken by the new government. The economic policy making about which much has been said in this last year as the country faced unprecedented price rise and inflation and current account deficit will be the key. There are several problems on the policy making front which will have long-term implications on the economy and the country which needs to be tackled. Today we will look at what 2014 holds for the country in terms of the political and policy paradigms. To discuss this, I have with me Mohan Guruswamy, visiting fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, Dr. Santosh, Mehrotra, Director General, Institute of Applied Manpower Research, Renu, Kohli, former staff member at the International Monetary Fund and RBI, and Paranjoy, Guha, Thakurta, Senior Journalist and an Economic Analyst. Welcome to all of you. Paranjoy, I would like to come to you first. How important do you think is the 2014 Lok Sabha results in terms of what will happen to our economy, what will happen to all the policies?
Very, very, very important. One couldn't underscore that even more. I mean, certainly the outcome of the 16th general elections is going to determine a lot of things, not just the economic policies, or it's also going to look at how our Indian polity, sort of shapes up, whether or not the polity fragments further, how the era of coalition politics plays itself out. If you look at between the general elections that took place in 96, then 98, 99 and 2004. Between 2004 and 2009, we had the incumbent coalition returning to power.
Yes.
Most people doubt whether that will happen in 2014. But either way, what you're going to see is whether there's going to be further fragmentation of the polity. In these 5 general elections...
Further fragmentation or...
That's right.
Or
consolidation.
Or consolidation, or maybe back to a single party rule?
All of these only time will tell. It's very difficult to predict the outcome of the general elections in this country. I mean, who would have thought? Did Mr. H.D. Devegowda ever think he'd become Prime Minister of India? Did Mr. Vajpayee ever think he'd lose a vote of confidence in April 1999 by a single vote? One vote in 543-member Lok Sabha. Now, you can't get any closer than that. Mr. Vajpayee, did he think he'd, preside over a 13-day-old government? So, I mean, we know politics, trying to predict the course of politics in India is a hazardous exercise in the best of time. So, time will tell whether you will see consolidation or fragmentation. Personally, I think there will be further fragmentation. That's my personal view. I mean, if you see the 2 large political parties in the country, together they have got about 50% of the vote in the last 5 general elections. I don't see why this trend should change significantly.
Okay, I mean,
so the Congress vote share may come down. The
no,
BJP
we will not look. We are not.
Okay.
Let us not look at that aspect. I'm talking about how, Mohan, fragmentation or consolidation. Either way, you think how will the economic policies play out when whichever combination comes into power, things like that? How will they approach these policies? Do you think that there will be major changes in the way economic policies are implemented in this country?
2 things. One is that our policy making framework or structures regime insensitive. There are broad...
Are regime insensitive?
Insensitive.
Okay.
There are broad consensus on a lot of things. For instance, there's a big consensus, across the board consensus on the question of subsidies. Across the board consensus on the question...
Do you think there is, on subsidies, there is...
Of course there is.
Across the board consensus?
No party is willing to tackle undeserved subsidies. No party will tackle it. There will be...
No party will withdraw it?
No party will withdraw it, precisely. Okay. The undeserved subsidies,
Undeserved according to you?
According to me, LPG subsidy is undeserved. Or, a lot of these things like milk subsidy in urban areas is undeserved. These will not be touched. Because there's a broad, sugar will not be touched. The broad consensus on that. And that is a huge cost to the economy every year. It's total subsidies itself, including public sector losses.
So, for instance, your point taken that there are certain things which
will not be touched. For instance, on the other hand, there are big issues like public sector, management of public sector.
Right.
Are you good decentralized management?
Exactly.
Of that? Are you going to make it profitable? Are you going to get this business of, for instance, like giving Air India 43,000 crores to Tide, so that 19,000 people can have their jobs? It's not going to stop because there's a broad consensus on this. So to expect something new, and when there is no strong regime, this will continue. This will not break. Because this consensus has been forged over the years. BJP believes in it, the Congress believes in it, the left believe in it. In terms of economic policies, there's not a big spectrum of difference there.
Paranjoy, I'd like to come back to you quickly. Do you agree with Mohan?
No,
do
I
you
don't
think that?
agree with him.
Do you think that there is a policy consensus across?
No, between the Congress and the BJP, there is indeed considerable overlap in terms of economic policies. You can say Congress is a little more left of centre, BJP is a little more right of centre. But other than the Congress and the BJP, I don't think there is that kind of consensus on the direction of economic policies. I think that consensus is often illusory. I think on the main issues, there are like issues relating to liberalization of the economy,
yes,
globalization of the economy, privatization of public sector. I don't think there's a consensus on these issues. For instance, you take this whole issue of, say,
because
foreign direct investment.
Even within the BJP, there are differences on this.
Yes, even within the large political parties, yes, within the Congress, there is a left.
Congress is a difference.
Absolutely
but
correct.
Outside this spectrum, outside
Absolutely.
this, except for the leftists,
Yes,
which are 5-6% of the total vote.
Yes.
There's a consensus among other parties. You talk about the regional parties. Do they have a view on economic policies?
No,
Apart
that is
from
not the
regional
point. The
issues?
point is that
Girish, let me give you an example.
Yes.
Foreign direct investment in multi-brand retail. On this, the political class is divided.
Yes.
I mean, there's one section within the Congress which wants it desperately. Though, despite it's been more than 1 year since the policy was changed and very little has happened on the ground. Within the BJP too, there's a section. But there's also a section within the Congress and within the BJP that does not want it. I mean, and not just the left. So, I mean, there are a number of issues on which there's no consensus.
Okay, Renu Kohli, Renu Kohli, you think how much do you think that?
Yes.
Mohan Guruswamy has an interesting theory. He says that not much difference is there between the major political parties as far as policy issues are concerned. But do you think that how you think that the 2014 general elections can change the way economic policy making is done, or should change?
I actually agree with both Mr. Guruswamy and Paranjoy. Mr. Guruswamy is absolutely right in saying that there isn't much difference. In fact, the biggest counterfactual evidence that there isn't substantially no difference as far as subsidies is concerned is we can see that there are many state governments which are being ruled, which are under rule of a different political configuration and political hue, and yet they outdo the center as far as promise of minimum support prices or food security laws is concerned. It's happening. Populist subsidies is happening by all the non-UPA state governments as well in different hues, and these extend beyond food subsidies. Number one. Number two, taking Paranjoy's point about fragmentation vis-a-vis consolidation, I think that is critical. If you see in the last 3-4 years, what has happened is that there has been a lot of reforms from 1991 onwards. And I would say that these were, I would point out that these were all product market liberalizations, and they involved basically decision taking and liberalization by the government at the center.
Right.
So, you had trade policy, you had FDI policies in many regards, you had industrial deregulation and so on. Now that first round of reforms is over, it has paid dividends, and if you see in the last 3-4 years, reforms have come stuck. And those are stuck at points which deal with issues like land, center-state relations, where actually constitutionally the state governments have a say. Land, labor, all these which are factor market reforms and which are very essential for the next round of growth impulses for the Indian economy. They are pretty much state subjects. So it is very much linked to how much of a consensus is there or convergence is there and how much fragmentation is there. Frankly, this government UPA too has been accused of a lot of policy paralysis, and that is true in a sense. But much of that stems from the fact that there is no legislation which is bringing about convergence on issues of land acquisition bills, issues like GST and so on. You referred to current account deficits. Let's put it in a larger sense about improvement or strengthening the national balance sheet. I would not look so much on the expenditure side. I think what India needs to seriously look at is on the revenue side. Its revenue base is very, very low with vis-a-vis comparator countries also.
No, all points well taken.
We need tax harmonization.
Renu, I'll come back to you. I mean, Santosh, reforms. You think that the kind of reforms which were needed even in the last 2-3 years that we have been hearing, policy paralysis, that reforms which had to be made has not been done. So you think that a coalition government, if we see another coalition government coming to power, same one or another one, you think that these reforms will be, they will be able to take forward those reforms which Renu Kohli also is talking about?
Well, the risk currently is that the coalition that will probably come about is going to be a weaker coalition than the one we've had so far. I mean,
why would you say that?
Well, the likelihood of an anti-incumbency and all the scams is that it's going to have an impact on the UPA's vote. As a result, there could well be.
You're saying that the coming coalition government could be a weaker coalition.
That's right, because there are. I mean, it's not entirely clear that the regional parties are not going to make gains. They are probably likely to make even greater gains in the forthcoming elections against the two major national parties, and as a result of which, and the Aam Aadmi Party is going to likely to clear the pitch. So the likelihood of a weaker coalition is higher than ever before. If that's the case, then the possibility of second generation economic reforms is reduced, and that's truly a problem, because we are in desperate need for second generation economic reforms, because even when we've had a strong coalition, a relatively well consolidated coalition which was beginning to weaken in the last 2 years or so, we've not had the second generation reforms. That's the fundamental
Mohan,
crux of the problem.
I think he has raised a very interesting point. It's an important point what he says, that the nature of the coalition which is going to come to power is going to be important, and what kind of actions they will be able to take.
More than that, I think the failure to reform government itself, to make the delivery system more effective and efficient, is not coming about. On that, the centralization of power within the central government and the state governments is quite enormous.
So you think that the next government will be forced to take up all these things, considering the kind of situation we have reached?
They haven't even begun to talk about it. Now, if you look at the wage structure of the state of India, 45% is incurred by the central government, 43% incurred by the state government, and only 11-12% is incurred by the local government at the level at which people see government. Yeah. So where you need government, there is no government. So you have this whole armies of guys telling you what to do. Now, the big difference in China is that in the 50s, 70% expenditure was central government. It shifted, it became 30%, and 70% of the wages are now paid by the provincial and local government. So the degree of decentralization is quite huge. What we have in India is still a very colonial structure. Is this policeman-run structure? I think all of us are pretty aware of the fact. People are aware of what are the problems. How are these problems? Do you think any of these problems will be able to tackle? Without structural changes.
Yes.
Because the nature of the regime determines the nature of the outcome.
Exactly. Nature of the yes.
Let's assume what Santosh is saying is correct, that we have a weaker coalition in Delhi. The regional parties become more powerful. We'll know only really in May 2014 the actual complexion and character of the government. Mohan Guruswamy is absolutely correct. I mean, in terms of decentralization and devolution of powers, including fiscal powers, India remains far more centralized than, say, a country like China, or for that matter, even the United States or Brazil or many other countries. Having said that, I also think when he talks about second generation reforms, what Renu said earlier, the real key reforms, and which are the difficult reforms, because you have to get everybody together, is things like a common goods and services tax to unite the, I mean, to me, that would be the single because so-called reform. People don't talk about that loudly. I think that is the real challenge.
And there is no political consensus on that at all so far.
No, I think it can be arrived at. And I think it's and if even if it's a weak coalition government in Delhi, it can arrive at. I mean, we've been struggling for the better part of the last decade to put it together. I mean, we've had opposition finance ministers, finance minister of West Bengal, the finance minister of Bihar to try and put it together. I don't think any reason. See, at the end of the day, the government in Delhi has to give up some of its powers too. There are areas where I do believe a consensus can be forged. And I'm not entirely pessimistic, you know, about, in that sense, about what can be achieved and what can't. Yes.
You know, Paranjoy is making a very interesting point, and I think in the light of what I was arguing, tentatively arguing, of course, that the regional parties become more powerful, come out more powerful as a result of this electoral result. It may well be that the states assert themselves to a greater extent than has been possible in the economic and political formation that we've lived with for a long period of time.
That could lead to less centralization.
Less centralization, and God, we are in desperate need of greater decentralization. And Paranjoy is spot on in respect of the China, and as is Mohan. The degree of decentralization in China is paradoxically much greater, despite the fact that it has a unitary constitution, we have a federal constitution.
Single party rule.
I'm not so troubled by the centralization in Delhi as the centralization in the states.
Absolutely
because
right.
in most states,
absolutely
the
right.
Panchayat Raj have become ineffective.
No, their revenue is exceeded by their salaries.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly. Renu, you know, if we try to look forward a little, what are the key reforms you think, in which areas, in which sectors do you think that key reforms need to be done? And you know, let us keep aside for a moment whether we will have a strong coalition or a weak coalition or a single party rule or otherwise. What are those key reforms which needs to be done? One, Paranjoy says CST.
In my view, there are two key reforms that are urgently required for addressing the two pressing and enduring macroeconomic problems. One is, of course, the fiscal deficit, and the second one is inflation. Both require actually cooperations and decision at the state government levels. As far as food inflation is concerned, there is definite evidence to show that the restrictions, interstate restrictions, as well as the movement of food and fruits, vegetables, etc., from the farm gate to the wholesale markets and thereafter to retail is impeded by several layers. And many state governments levy very, very high taxes. In Punjab, for example, mandi taxes are more than about 14.5%. So there is a need to look at these acts again, which is basically the Agriculture Produce and Marketing Committee Act, the APMC, which has frankly outlived its utility. So that's one thing. There has to be a freer movement for transport of, for regulation of agriculture, and something which is India's frankly now much more of a common market. And unfortunately, the regulations remain at the state level. So states need to cooperate on that. The second is the Goods and Services Tax, which is also all about removing a lot of layers and which go on to add and a cumulative make cumulative taxation, and hence final prices higher than they would be otherwise.
Okay.
Both of them require consultation within the states and cooperation and bargaining. And that, I think, directly feeds back into what kind of government we get. Even if we were actually to get a majority government and all, it cannot come about simply because there are constitutional issues. There are matters on which states can legislate alone. There are matters on which both center and states can legislate. And there are matters on which only the center can legislate.
Okay.
So these are constitutional issues, and whatever be the leadership hue, I frankly am a bit pessimistic because there is a lot more politics to the resolution or consensus of GST. There is consensus actually. There is broadly consensus on everything. It's just the politics of it that has impeded it for the last 3-4 years. It's very sorry state of affairs, but that's the case as it is.
Okay, Paranjoy, you know, do you see different, you know, what we are talking now of the way the governments are completely controlled by the corporates, the social sector. You know, some people say that, you know, this government is too pro social sector. Some people say they're too pro corporate sector. Do you see that kind of a situation changing at all? Whichever view of government
I must tell you, I'm very optimistic in this regard. You know, the world over and also in India, we have a nexus between business and politics. I mean, it's commonly known. Given the corrupt manner in which our political parties are funded, in which our election campaigns are funded, the good thing that has happened, and I think the Aam Aadmi Party's excellent performance in Delhi has contributed to that situation, is we are going to see greater transparency. And I see, irrespective of the color, the complexion, the character of the next union government in Delhi, I think there are certain inexorable forces, and there's a huge amount of pressure from below to ensure that our political and economic and bureaucratic systems become more transparent, which is a good thing.
And they will be forced to become more transparent.
They have to, necessarily. I mean, to some extent it's modern technology, to some extent it's greater awareness, and that to me is the positive sign for 2014. I'm optimistic that we'll be a more transparent society and therefore a less corrupt society. I'm not suggesting that, you know, corruption is going to disappear day after tomorrow, but I see some signs of hope. I mean, the fact that one party, okay, only in Delhi, could fight an election, could run their campaign on small donations voluntarily given by large numbers of people and not slush funds from a few. To me, that's reclaiming an important tradition in Indian polity. You know, the Congress used to raise funds like this. So did the RSS. So did the left. So that's a positive sign, I see.
You know, the charter, I mean, Paranjoy's point would have been strengthened, and the probability of greater transparency in 2014 and beyond would have been strengthened if the 4 or 5 other bills which were supposed to accompany the Lokpal were actually...
We will see, because there is still hope. They are saying that there may be a special session when these bills are being passed. But there's a larger issue. But larger issue.
Right.
Do you think the complexion of the governments, the way they approach you know, these corporate interests, the way they approach the social sector interests, will there be any change in that?
I doubt it. I doubt it, because, you know, it's far more convenient to depend on a few
than to depend on this large.
You know,
you don't think the Aam Aadmi effect will...
But I think where the Aam Aadmi really is a one-trick pony. It has only this issue of, you know, how the party is going to conduct itself as the only issue. It has no consensus on any other issue. Somebody is in favor of giving away water free, somebody is in favor of giving away something else, somebody is in favor of, you know,
I think
having a tighter control,
not very fair, but
on tighter control on Kashmir. Prashant Bhushan wants to give it away.
Mohan, you represent the really cynical view which prevailed about the Aam Aadmi Party before the elections. But after the elections,
I still continue with it, because I still think, and I think what they've achieved is a great thing and it's a good thing. It's a lesson to these people. But I don't believe that there can be new politics with no politics. But the heart of this thing, that you have to have a heartbeat of politics in you.
We have to wait until,
you know,
until the next few days and the next 4 months.
Exactly. Yes.
You know something,
it's the next 4 or 5 months we will see how well they are governing.
What Mohan was saying was true about a year and a half ago. You know, at that time, the India Against Corruption movement claimed it was apolitical. The very fact that you set up a political party means you can't have these issues are intensely political.
And you know, they have to evolve.
One second.
And they are entitled to cynicism. And they are an evolving party.
Of course, they're barely a year old.
Yes.
No, he is entitled to his cynicism. There were enough people who thought, you know, no, one second.
To call realism cynicism.
No, that's fine. I mean, a lot of people thought they were realistic, and why would people vote for the Aam Aadmi Party? They'll waste their vote. I mean, who thought that?
25%.
Excuse me, I mean, everybody, including myself, we were surprised.
Myself, yourself.
We were all surprised that
even I gave a donation
after
to
3
Aam
terms
Aadmi
as chief minister,
Yes.
would get defeated by 25,000 votes.
Exactly.
That they would be so close to
So
getting a majority.
what are you saying here? That there is hope?
No, I'm saying that the Indian polity and Indian society and the Indian economy and the political economy of this country is necessarily going to become more transparent in the time to come. And to that, Aam Aadmi Party has made a major contribution.
Renu, do you agree with that view of Paranjoy? That more transparency needs to be done.
I just want to extend it.
Yes, please.
Yes, but let me just extend Paranjoy's argument or, you know, happiness. And I don't want to play spoil sport. But the other side, let's not forget, of transparency and lesser corruption is also the fact the stakeholder is not just the people, but the larger people, and there is an assumption, the underlying assumption is that it's the government which is corrupt, everybody else is clean.
Right.
That's not so.
That's right.
And the more transparency and lesser corruption we have, or at least even the introduction of transparency in allocation, in auctions, everything is going to push up costs. It's going to set in a new equilibrium for the private sector, or let me put it specifically, the private corporate sector. They will have to respond it, and let's face it, it's going to push up costs of doing business in some ways. We saw an example of that, the enormous tussle and prevention and the angst and the anger it has, passage of the land acquisition and rehabilitation bill has caused.
Right.
Now there are many stakeholders in the land acquisition process, and there is not necessarily a convergence over this. So more transparency also means slowing down many things. Simply because we have to wait and see how the private sector response comes, and where will the new equilibrium settle.
That is a reality check which everybody need to understand. Yes, Santosh, the fact of the matter is that there are very key areas of policy making which needs to be addressed. One is the telecom, in areas of telecom, in areas of mining, in areas of petroleum, all these policies. You think that the new government, in whichever hue and cry, will be able to set clear, transparent procedures and policies on this?
I think I'll just go back to my earlier point that it's ultimately going to be a function of the strength of the coalition. You may have a different kind of policy paralysis as a result of a weak coalition, if there is a weak coalition.
Okay. Yes.
I disagree with Renu on this whole issue about more transparency.
Slows down
decision making, increase costs of doing business. No, I think, I mean, if greater transparency also leads to a lowering of corruption, that would bring down costs. I mean, if people don't have to, earmark their slush funds to pay for their, their political masters, I mean, that's good for the economy. It's good for everybody. I think if we can move towards a system where these hidden costs.
You have oligopolies.
I think
so those high costs can be sustained.
Oligopolies.
But look at the way natural resources have been misallocated.
That is exactly that.
If we had a more,
I'll come to you.
I'm not endorsing all that. I'm just saying that there is going to be a churning, and that will take time.
Okay,
that's all I'm trying to say.
Churning is always good. Paranjoy, very quickly, I spoke about 3 areas at least. Policies on mining, on petroleum, on telecom, and all these things. Where do you see it going?
I see the government necessarily having to become more transparent. And I mean, whether it be on mining, whether it be on land acquisition, whether it be on natural gas or petroleum products.
And you attribute Aam Aadmi effect to some extent?
I attribute it not just to the Aam Aadmi, the fact that ordinary people of this country are far, far more aware than before, that the media, the new technology, the flows of information, and at the end of the day, look, if the government, which is supposed to be a custodian of resources that belong to the people of this country, if that custodian, that trustee is going to not be fair, is going to be biased, is going to be opaque, then at the end of the day, I think the people have every right to protest,
yes, Mohan,
and every right to try and change that system.
Quickly, last words.
No, I agree with this. Greater transparency. But you must also remember that in this last 25 years, we've had a whole slew of governments, coalition governments.
Yes,
everybody's been
of all use.
So we haven't really seen much change.
Oh.
I think it behoves on people like us to change the direction of the discourse.
Okay. On that note, Mohan, as usual, skeptical, to some extent cynical also, but people like Paranjoy see some hope there, and Renu also. So we will wait and watch how this whole thing will play out, how the economic policies will be made, whether it will be implemented properly, better. We will wait and watch. So in the meanwhile, we'll all welcome the new year 2014 and hope that things will be better for this country in the new year. Thanks to all my guests, Renu Kohli, Paranjoy Guha Thakurta, Mohan Guruswamy and Santosh Mehrotra. Thank you very much and a very happy new year.